Let's say we're roughly done with our design phase and I would like to work on purely on my renderings. Our scene is pretty dense. We used up a lot of layers, so it actually makes sense to create a new Blender file. For example, I would call this one maybe the project name plus rendering, and then I can remove everything I don't really need for the rendering, so all the profiles and beginning modeling steps, and then reorganize my blend file. So let's do that. First, just to prevent that by accident we override our design file, I will make a new file. So for example, here you see it's called Illy, Latte, Macchiato render. And this is just simply a naming I select, so I always know actually what's my design file and what is my render file. So let's see actually what we can remove. So layer 1, layer 2, and this layer below, this all has beginning profiles and some other studies for the bottle. And on layer 3, I have my bottle. So now when I move over to layer 1, and let's see, here we have the cap, so M layer 2. And what do we have down here? This is actually the thing for the threading. Sorry, not the threading, for the silicone cap and the cap. Maybe this one I move to layer 5. Because layer 5 I also have my threading, which I will actually use for the modeling. And on this layer I have all the previous stuff. I don't need it anymore. Then maybe let's go to layer 6. Something is calculating. I guess this is actually where I have my Illy logo. Yeah, good. This label we delete. And this is actually good that this artifact happened. So you see what's going on with my Illy text. Okay. So I forgot actually to mention one step. And the problem is we have this bottle, and onto the bottle we project the text, and then we say to the bottle, hey bottle, Boolean union this three-dimensional logo to yourself. Okay, not a big deal. But then actually this projection will not be projected onto the bottle, but it will be projected onto the bottle plus the already added text. And you see there is kind of like a flaw inside that process, because it would result in inaccurate results. All we want is just the logo that sits only on the bottle, and when we add this then to the bottle, that's all we want to see. So how do we solve this? This is actually insanely easy. All we need is just a clone. So this object here for the moment, I will turn off all those modifiers. And an easy and fast way to turn off all modifiers is simply go into edit mode, tab, because then when you in object mode and you turn one modifier off, all the others will be calculated. And in edit mode, those modifiers will not be calculated. So I can quickly turn them all off. Okay. Then actually right now I will do a shifty copy, so not a clone. Normally you want to have a clone so that whenever maybe I change this one, the projection model for the logo will be updated as well. However, actually later we will put a fluid in here, so we have to change the bottle design a little bit. So that's why not a clone, just shifty, escape. Let's rename, for example, this one to target, shrink target, okay. And maybe this one I move on to, for the moment, maybe this layer, okay. So, and then this Illy text, you see currently the shrink wrap modifier uses the solid, however now I want this one. So you see the text uses this bottle to project onto. So this bottle, well, where is it? There. And later actually we will add then this deformed text to the bottle on layer 1. Okay, so what do we have on this layer? This can go. this is actually for the groove, so we put this on layer 5. Okay, also layer 5. What do we have on layer there? Oh, this is actually the insert. Maybe layer 3. What do we have here? And there are the 2 labels, so maybe those we put onto layer 4. Okay, so now actually I cleaned up my scene significantly, but maybe you would also like to know what's really on these layers. So for example, actually this one for the moment I also put onto layer 5 there, and so it doesn't block my view. I will actually make this one maybe I can turn this into a wire model, so it will always look like this. That's perfect, that's good. And maybe this here I also turn into wire. The rest I would like to see. Great. So another interesting, or not interesting, very useful tool actually to manage later your scenes, because maybe you want to have different render settings, different camera positions, different lights, and essentially you want to separate that onto different layers so that you could turn on a layer or turn off a layer and you have different lighting settings or camera positions. And for that, maybe we want to be able to name our layers. So we can go to user preferences, go to add-ons and type in layer. This actually will load or filter out the 3D view layer manager. And I have it already turned on by default. So just click on this one. Also a warning, if you now click save user setting, you will also save everything that's inside your 3D scene right now as a default. So every time when you want to activate your new add-on, it's a little bit annoying, but what you would have to do is, I'm going to save this one, new file, yeah. Then actually here, let's go to layer, turn it on. Then we can say save user setting or save startup file. And then when we go back to our previous file, those settings we activated will be loaded by default as well. So what does this layer manager actually do? So let me go into full screen. By the way, full screen, pretty nice in Blender. Put your mouse over a viewport and then shift spacebar and shift spacebar in and out. So one command. But by tapping it twice, you make it full screen and go back to from the full screen. And inside the 3D view, you now have inside the toolbar on the left side layers. So for example, now here I could maybe start naming these layers. So this, for example, I say is my bottle. What do I have here? This is, for example, my cap. Then this is my threading, no, sorry, insert cap. And here, for example, layer 4, I have my labels. And on this layer, I have my Boolean parts. So you can see you can turn visibility on and off. So this actually works pretty much the same way. You can even lock a layer. So now I can't actually click anything on that layer. Pretty nice, actually. Okay, so as a first step, what I would do is actually maybe add a camera. So I press 1, go into front view. And the reason why I do this is simply when I now add a camera, it will be positioned where the 3D cursor is and it will look at my object from the front view. So to add a camera, very difficult, Shift A and then go to camera. Click and zoom out a little bit and there's the camera. The camera is pretty big, as you can see. So I also, right now, I'm a little bit annoyed by this grid. So temporarily, I will turn off the grid, this and this, maybe the Z1 and leave on. Oh no, I don't need that one. And this is nice to see, but also for the moment, I turn off the world background. So less irritating. Okay. this camera icon is way too big, so I press S and simply scale it down. And then I can move it to maybe somewhere there. And then you see I'm in orthographic view R and rotate it a little bit down. To go into the camera view, you simply press 0 on your numpad, or you go to View and Camera. So, active camera, there it is. We can also have multiple cameras, by the way. There's also numpad. So, for example, Shift D, make a copy, move this one down, and 0. See, doesn't really look at that camera. We just create it. We could go now and say active camera, and you see the difference is actually, while I have this one selected, this is the active one because it has that solid thing here. So shortcut, click the camera you want to look through, Control 0, and then it snaps to it. Or go back to this one and camera there, Control, set active camera as camera, or set active object. But essentially it's a camera. There. Perfect. Okay, so this way, for example, you can easily have different cameras and then switch between those cameras to look through. Now let's say I would also like to have a camera that sees my object from the side, so I don't always want to go into side view and top view and then rotate the camera so it looks always to the correct position. There's a much better approach. So what we'll do is actually we will add another empty. And for example, let's rename this object. Actually, we can do it all here. N and where is it? Item there. Camera target. So this I'm gonna move maybe to here. And unfortunately, I have to go to there to scale it down 1 centimeter. Okay. So this camera, I click, shift click the empty, and then we press Control T. And we will select track to constraint. And what this basically means is now this camera always tracks this empty. You see when I move the empty, it always looks at it. If I move the camera, I can move the camera, but it still will always look where that empty is. So this is actually a really nice way if, for example, I want that my picture center point will be right actually where this empty is. So if I go to my camera, you will see this is perfectly leveled or centered. And if I move this one down, this rim of my bottle is still at the midpoint of my camera. If I go into top view and I move this one around, you see this is actually a really nice and quick way to really make sure visually to position the camera center or focus correctly. Okay, but in our case we want the camera actually to be at the center. I can actually also select both, for example, and even rotate from the side. So there are really many ways how we could work. This, for example, let's say we make 11 centimeters, and then this one we make also 11 centimeters, so it's all at the same height. Okay. Also, when we are inside the 3D view, so through the camera, we can select the camera and the empty and press G and, for example, Z to slide it up and down, X to go left and right. I can also just select my camera, G and Z, or I can just click the empty and then G and Z or X. So there are multiple ways how you could adjust actually the camera position and where it looks to. Maybe last setting, when we go to the camera, let's actually close those views, we don't need them anymore. There and there. We can set the camera between perspective and orthographic. and there's a focal length. So for example, if we set this one to 5 and then G, Z, Z, so now we move along the Z axis with the shift button pressed for the camera, clipping 1 centimeter, G and Z, Z, Z along local Z, and then we shift move the mouse button. You see actually the bottle is very, very distorted. If we set this one to maybe 55, GZZ, and then move the mouse down, we can zoom out. So that's, for example, where we also set up, for example, the lens for the camera. Everybody who is familiar with photography and compositional guides, we also have compositional guides in here, which we could turn on as an overlay. So this is really nice and very helpful. Obviously, again, there's more to how to work with the camera, for example, depth of field, etc. But we will go into that in later assignments. For the moment, I would just like to keep it at that. And actually, this is also nearly everything already about what you really have to know about how to place a camera in an empty and then how to position them correctly. One last thing for us maybe to do, select everything, and for example, let's move them all to layer 6, and for example here we say camera. So you see actually when you have object selected and you click on this ring, now on this circular button, you move it to that respective layer. There. Perfect. Okay. So here my bottle is back. As a small tip, actually, when we start working on the materials and we only want to render maybe certain parts, so that, for example, the pre-rendering will be finished faster, we can actually press inside the camera view, Shift B, and then drag over a certain area. And then, for example, if I turn on Shift Z for rendering, you will see that only what's inside this render border actually will be rendered. And that actually means that everything outside will not be calculated, and thus the render speed is faster. So this is actually a pretty good way, specifically when you work on smaller laptops, to accelerate your rendering a little bit. So what I would like to do now at first is actually to show that there's a fluid inside our bottle. The problem is actually in real life we have a glass vessel, and then when we put fluid, let's say coffee or something into it, the volume and the mass of the glass will hold actually the fluid in place. That also means that where the glass hits, for example, the fluid, we have no air in between. The two surfaces of those two materials perfectly sit next to each other, really on top of each other. That's actually very difficult to do in computer graphics because, you know, those surfaces can easily intersect each other. So we have to build our fluid body a little bit different. However, that's actually not very complicated. So what I will do is, in this case, I will go into an orthographic front view. Then I go into edit mode. And you see actually I have for the moment, the bevel modifier deactivated, so I can easily see also where my subdivision surface cage would be on the mesh. And what I will do now is I will alt click onto this edge while being in face select. Sorry, control click, left click. And then I will press H to hide it, and then I will move my mouse over this face, press L. You see it selects everything that's linked, press H. And this way now I have hidden actually my outer surface. I will press Ctrl R and maybe somewhere here add another loop cut. Yep, that's okay. And actually now I can go back and turn this sub D view off. And what I will do now is I will select, for example, all this, and actually maybe we can keep it in the same file. We can press, for example, Y. So Y actually, as you see, split. You can press G now to move it away. So the two surfaces are disconnected. And you might ask yourself, well, why did I do this? The main reason is simply because now we apply actually a different material to this. So I will actually remove the glass, or here delete this one, and then click New and say glass, and for example give this one like a blue signal color for the moment. Okay, good. And then press H to hide it, Control left click onto this rim, and then I press E, for example, to pull this one down a little bit, E and S to pull it inwards a little bit, maybe another E and S, and then I can press F to fill it. So, and then let's go back to edit mode there. Okay, good. So now in the next step, I will select all this. And for example, what happened here? Oh, okay, that makes sense. I overwrote actually my previous material. So let's say we call this one fluid. And I click on the plus icon and I will bring back my glass. And now I will go to edit mode. This is fluid. I can press Ctrl I, select glass and say assign. Always to make sure that, for example, you have everything materialized the correct way, we can use the viewport, and there we see actually the colors work quite correct. You see actually this one pulls up a little bit too much, so Control R and push a loop cut on the inner surface down till, for example, this blue material stops at this line. That's what we want. Okay, and then press Alt H to show the rest. So you see actually the outside of the bottle actually is bluish as well. That's not correct. So we can, for example, select the outer surface. And as you can see, click glass, say assign. And then actually what's easier, hide it, select this face, L, glass, assign. And you see now then that we applied all the correct materials to the different mesh parts. Alt H, leave edit mode, go to the camera, Shift Z, and let's take a look. And then actually that looks pretty good. So you see that basically what we did was we gave the inner face of our bottle the liquid material, and so it's also really filled with liquid. We created a top surface for that liquid. And for example, this top surface we slightly arc down, so you kind of like can see the surface tension inside the bottle. This actually all has a blurriness applied, so let's take this one off. And there it is. So maybe now the lower part of our bottle should actually have a little bit more glass material. So we could go into edit mode, and then here I simply select all these faces and hide it. So I can, for example, from the side easily select all this, GZ, move it a little bit up, Alt H. Okay, so there's a certain level of more glass material added to it. Edit mode, Shift Z, and yeah, there we see it. To make things a little bit easier to work with, honestly, what we could do in this case is I select, for example, a face of this inner surface that describes most of the fluid, and then press P to separate it. Now, it's always a lot easier to actually click between the different objects. One last step, we have to make sure, we have to check to see if all the normals are correct. So if the surface looks into the correct direction, and we have mesh display normal 1 centimeter, and you see all these lines actually face to the inside. That is all correct. Let's go to here, and they all face also to the outside. Okay, so this is also all correct. Okay, so at this point, maybe we can then actually turn back on our bevel modifier, so this area is sharper. Maybe the Illy logo we could turn on. The threading, maybe I don't necessarily have to show at the moment. As long as there's, for example, a cap, there is no reason to have this one turned on, including actually also the rendering. Only actually when really just the bottle with the threadings exposed with no cap on top, then I really want to show it. However, I actually see, I think the Illy logo here has the wrong color or material, so let's take a look what's going on. This one actually, for example, we can give this glass material. So let's see if this actually fixes it. And yeah, there, this is changed. Perfect. So let's maybe take a look. And maybe click the glass. The fluid is actually right now kind of bluish, doesn't really look like espresso. So how does milk look like? Milk is kind of like a yeah, I mean it's water and particles inside, so it looks kind of milky. It's a very expensive material to accurately simulate, but actually we could fake this a little bit. So mainly the property of milk is that first it's not blue, it is white, and then we add the coffee to it. It only gets a little bit brownish. Okay, but then it's not really that clear. It is a little bit clear, but mainly it is actually opaque. Actually more translucent, but maybe to make this rendering a tick faster, Control C, Control V to copy and paste the colors, we actually mix this maybe with a diffuse material, 0.75, so it's a little bit more opaque than actually transparent because of the glass. And yeah, this actually might not be too bad. So let's set this one maybe to 500. And even while maybe this setting right now is kind of like a quick hack, it's not 100% correct, that's actually okay, because at the moment we just quickly explore possible looks or directions, so we don't have to be so physically accurate, something we will actually do in a later point. And maybe the glass, I make it tick more diffuse, so roughen this up a little bit, maybe. Yeah, so the reflection looks not so strong, but no, maybe not. Maybe just keep it at this. Because what we haven't really talked about yet is how can we now design the scene more with lights. And for this exercise, I would like to be pretty brief. So for example, we can show also the cap on top and maybe the logo. So it's loading for a second there. And we can actually see that my label's a little bit too far off the bottle, so I have to adjust this. So I assume maybe 0.15. Nope, that is actually too much. Yeah, that is fine. And now I see, the text is really hard to read. The texture is in my way. How does this maybe look without this texture? Oh, this is actually not too bad, but white looks kind of bland and boring. Well, what about if we copy in the color from the milk and espresso mixture? I still have the bump mapping going on, so I see that it's just not a flat glossy surface. So maybe for the moment I can leave it this way, and you see actually because of the color contrast, the fluid or the color of the fluid can be seen inside where the letters are cut out. So this effect is actually not too bad. Obviously this logo looks pretty bland, but we will work on this one later. So what can we do now actually to make this rendering maybe a little bit more interesting? We have reflections on here, but they're not really very strong. The problem is we're also right now restricted or limited to the reflection on our glass based on what's inside this image. Well, we could, for example, maybe make this image brighter, then the reflections will be better, but also stronger, and maybe this is not necessarily the best idea. There's actually, when we go to the scene button, there is color management. Maybe we can adjust values like the white tone, the black tone. So for example, we can turn on the curves, drag this one down, drag this one up. Everybody who's doing photography immediately knows what I'm talking about, kind of like working with the gradation curves. Yeah, let's turn this one on and off. You see it actually, the previews instantly, but doesn't really do much better actually with my highlights. What about if I push this one higher up? Maybe I keep those there. Let's compare, maybe, but still not really what I'm looking for. We can actually simulate certain film looks. So maybe, how does this one look? Or this one. Oh, this is interesting. Or this one. So this film and this film actually I use a lot in my commercial work, because very often the colors look nice and rich. It's a good correction. Compare this one maybe to none, and you see like this is kind of like gray faded, and this has a certain brilliance to it. But again, this is more adjusting all the colors. It doesn't really address the issue of our reflections. So one of the main issues I very often see with renderings when reflections are empty, the main reason is simply a reflection can only show what you give the reflection to reflect. So we need to put stuff into our scene. So let me introduce you actually now how we can place artificial lights. And we will start actually with mesh planes. We can use them as lights. So Shift A, and let's make this one maybe 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters. Oh, this is actually pretty big. Let's see if this will work. RX 90, move this one to here, and then in top view maybe rotate it so that the face kind of like is perpendicular to this bottle. So what's this plane actually going to do? Well, we will turn this one into a light. To do this, we can go to Materials, New, set Diffuse to Emission, and let's take a look by turning on the rendering. And I will actually split this view so I can see my bottle here a little bit bigger. There. And then here in top view, I can now move this one around and see maybe where does this one show up. Problem is, well, if I move it in front of my camera, then it's blocking it. Welcome to digital rendering. We can simply turn visibility off. So go to the object property. For example, we name this one right mesh light. Then we go to cycles and say camera, you don't see this object. Perfect. Well, maybe the strength isn't good enough. So we could go to strength. And let's say see what happens when we give it a 10 value. Oh, this is way too much. What about maybe 3? Yeah, maybe 2. Okay. But maybe we would like to have the same object on the other side, so I rotate it. Maybe I move it to a little bit there. So you see now I have a nice reflection there and there. And now compare this one simply with this rendering. This is kind of lacking. And here we make use of the environmental image to give basic light to our scene, and then we place some extra key lights to kind of like sculpt our environment. So this actually works really nice also for the Illy logo. Let me zoom on to that part. There you see how everything nicely is illuminated. And if we take this one off, you still see it there, but with the lights actually there's a little bit more brilliance to it. So specifically when you work with reflective surfaces, having good light, and meaning illumination and shadow, is really key to have certain features to pop out. So for example, on my rendering here now, the bump mapping works much better compared to this version. You can see that there is something happening, but it's not really bright enough, it doesn't have enough contrast. In this way, this looks much better. Maybe now actually for the bottle I would like to see also how the grooves look, so I can turn the visibility on for my grooves. And do we see much? Actually from that view we don't really see much, but they are there. Okay, so maybe let's take a look from here. There you can see it. Ah, that's why. Wrong material. So let's go to our threading here, or the layer where all the Boolean objects are, and then also you just be a glass material. So the Boolean operation simply adds also the glass material from those parts to there. Okay, and now I'm lost. Where are my mesh lights? So, oh, there are my mesh lights. Okay, M and maybe 7. Now we can go to the layer manager and, for example, say mesh lights. Maybe test 1. So you can actually have different versions inside one and the same scene. So let's turn rendering on again. Let's maybe make another variation, because what I would like to do now is actually I take this one, Shift D, Escape M, go to the next layer, turn this layer off, turn this layer on. My 3D cursor is actually set at where's 3D cursor? There. So here XYZ 0. So what I will do now is 3D cursor, Shift D, Escape, Control M to mirror, and then press X to mirror it over to the other side. Whoops. Control M, X. So in this one we have rotated actually 64. So let's say 65. And then maybe here minus 65 there. So now we get actually 2 perfectly even light reflections left and right on our bottle. And maybe I would like to have one light also behind. So let's make this one 0 and make this maybe so it's bigger actually than my camera. Go down there. And so I have to change now the naming of my material. So for example here, click on this 5. So I made a new material and call this one emission background. And then I can set this maybe to 1 so it's not too strong. And you see actually that it brightens up everything a little bit if desired. And the object, of course, is also hidden actually from the camera. Maybe I don't want it to show up inside any glossy reflections, but maybe just show it up during the rendering. So you see, you can turn all the stuff actually on and off. So maybe let's give this one a different color for the moment. There you can actually see how this influences everything. So maybe just for this actually I just want to fill my back area, but not necessarily really shoot light into my scene, because diffuse is light and glossy way that makes the object show up on the rendering. And then for the color here, we set this one to RGB1. So this is like a pure clean white. Perfect. Okay, so for example, in this one, maybe this we could call mesh layer 3 lights, and maybe mesh layer 2 front lights. So you see, that's the way how you then can easily work with different layers, turn them on and off, and get different results. Now, one last tip, because I didn't do it, this and this, they all use the same materials, and the same is actually true also for this layer. So be aware of that. If you make a copy of an object, you also link actually the material. So maybe this one should be right light, and this one should be left light. Let's go to the other scene, layer. This one should be the right light, and this one should be the left light. And that's emission back. And maybe show the layer with our labels on it. And then we're actually nearly ready to do a rendering into an image. So I can actually turn all this on. This is actually the silicone cap, I don't need it. And now you see where my camera is, and also how wide my camera is. Let's say you really know the amount of dimensions you need for your rendering. So we could go to dimensions, and let's say it should be let's say 400 pixels by 800 pixels. There. Let's make actually Shift B over it. Also here you have border on and off. So you see actually there it renders the border. And now I can Z actually move the camera in a little bit more, so I frame my product better. This one actually I move down a little bit, and S and Z scale it there. Okay, so it frames it. Okay. Also, let's save. And you see here we have render 10 and render 500. So this preview is actually what you see here, this interactive preview. And then the render, is actually used for the final rendering. So what we can do now, I will do this a little bit quicker, so maybe 20. And this is all okay, 400 by 800. We can keep it that way. You will either have CPU or GPU. If you're on NVIDIA cards like I am, you can use GPU. If you do not have NVIDIA cards, you can use CPU. That's all fine. This is all okay. We could go to performance. You see something here, X and Y. For example, maybe when you're on a CPU, type in 64, 64 for each. And when you're on a GPU rendering, so with NVIDIA cards, take like your X and Y, and then cut them down maybe to 200 by 200 or 400, so we actually have bigger tiles. So what does that actually mean? Sounds a little bit confusing. Let me quickly give you a demonstration what that means. So we can go now into render. And I'm currently rendering with my 3D graphics cards. So I have 2 cards built in. And this was way too fast. Okay, let's set this one to 100 so it takes longer to render. Because when you're new to it, this sounds very confusing, but it's actually very logical. There, you see like bigger blocks or tiles, and then everything got rendered. Okay. And if I go to CPU, and for example set 64 and 64 and render. Oh, hold on, I made a mistake. You don't have this auto tile turned on, so but actually just type in the numbers by hand. Because I work actually on a Mac Pro with 8 cores. You see I have more tiles, but I make the tiles smaller, so each tile only has to work on a small area, and in case that area is very slow, this particular tile only works longer while all the other smaller tiles continue working on the rest of my scene. This is actually the nice thing about CPUs. You have more cores you could work with. If you have a GPU, you basically only have actually 1 core per graphics card, which is why you need to have actually, you can basically per graphics card you only have 1 tile. So I can only render with 2 tiles, but the graphics card are insanely fast. So if you have the ability, that's actually something to consider. And I will talk about CPU and GPU rendering also later. I want to keep the technicality out for the beginning. You see there is a small issue we have here. So let's take a look what's going on. There's my label. Here, that's the reason. View was 4, render was 2. Let's go to the bottle and view 3, render 2. So these numbers should exactly be the same. Let's compare. I click onto slot 2. That's an empty slot, a buffer I could render actually now another image into. And let's hold on. And yeah, there it is. That's the way how it should look like. And then with J, well, for example, we can switch between the different views. Really nice. Okay, so now when we go back actually to this color management, we can always, before we write into the file, we can always continue adjusting everything we see here. We can also just work with the exposure and the gamma. So this is actually a really nice process for color adjusting your work before you write anything actually into a file. Pretty awesome. Okay, now how to write into a file. We go to image and then save image or save as. Go to where you want to save it. Select maybe TIFF or PNG. Don't really work with JPEG, just ignore it. And give it a name and click save. And we actually finish our first rendering.